And there we go. Welcome back, everybody. So today we've got a new interview for you with Ali from the Bronx Witch. So thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
And if you don't know about Ali from Bronx Witch, then you can find her links down below. I'll make sure they're there. Instagram and YouTube will be there. And today I have the list in front of me of things we're going to be talking about. We're talking mainly about healing. We're bringing in energies of herbalism and healing and what that means in the current situation, both in terms of the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, in terms of the many implications that has both on a physical and spiritual level, and as well as what's going on in the world in terms of racial violence and the way to heal from a holistic point of view. So these are Ali's preferred topics, as always. When inviting people on here, I'm like, what would you like to talk about? So that's what we're going to be chatting today. So I thought we'd maybe start with talking a little bit about you. And you said to me that you were working with and coming up and learning all about herbalism and Reiki. Yes. Mm-hmm. So what that means to you and how that has sort of become a part of your practice, maybe.
Yeah. I think for me, my journey is a little unique, just in that it started so young. Most folks like myself who grew up in a conservative or very strictly Christian background usually don't start delving into spirituality or, alternative faith paths and practices until they get a little bit older. So it happened for me at a very young age. And so that's given me some time to really kind of figure out, like, why do I want to practice magic? Now that I've grown up a little bit and I'm a little bit over the sparkles of the crystals and the fantastic decor and not really, but a little bit. So now, like, what does my magic really mean as an adult? And I guess a serious part of my lifestyle. And as I've been going on that journey, what's revealed itself to me is that energy is really everything. And it's so important. And we typically don't think about the way we're being affected by things until it affects our physical body. Mm-hmm. And we are in pain, or we are suffering from some type of an illness, or, mental disorders are starting to show themselves in our life. And oftentimes what I realized in my own life is that long before anything physical or tangible happened, emotionally I was traumatized, spiritually I was struggling. It's like when you face a traumatic situation, it hits you kind of out here first, and then it like travels inward. And so as an adult, my magic has been about, okay, how do I protect all of those layers? How do I protect myself energetically and spiritually? How do I take care of myself emotionally? How do I take care of myself physically? And it turns out, for me, they're all connected. Mm-hmm. And so tarot and Reiki and herbalism, they're all different ways for me to address my health, essentially, on all of those levels. And so that's where I am right now, using those tools. I consider them tools to help balance all of my energies, the ones I can feel and sort of like touch, and the ones that I can't see or can't express to others as easily.
It's really interesting, because from the everyday, how the world was before COVID hit, to when COVID hit and changed the story, that was what came first, and what really began impacting on people's health and spiritual health and emotional health in ways that nobody could have been prepared for, really, and nobody really knew what to expect. Do you think there is some key advice that you think can help people who are struggling with perhaps the physical manifestations of the spiritual and emotional disharmony and trauma that's happening because of COVID, and there's a lot of death energy obviously in the world as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing for all of us to do is to first try to become aware and recognize where trauma is happening and whether or not it is happening. Because I think a lot of times we go through things that are traumatizing and we don't even realize it because it didn't necessarily happen directly to our physical body. So if you've been dealing with the COVID situation and you've been blessed enough not to physically actually contract it and get ill, you might think, well, everything's fine. I'm all right. I made it through. Everything is okay. And in reality, your body, and when I say body, I mean physical, spiritual, emotional, intellectual, all your bodies have probably undergone some trauma from what we have gone through. So my first piece of advice would be to try to tune in and listen to your body. We often dismiss things that happen to us. Oh, I just had a bad night's sleep, or, oh man, insomnia, I can't get to bed, or, I'm really anxious. And we sort of dismiss these things as just normal parts of life. But the reality of it is, it isn't actually normal for your body to not be able to sleep, or to sleep for an hour and then wake up, or for you to be, clinically depressed or very anxious. These are manifestations of a traumatic experience that you've had. So I would first ask people to kind of tap in and tune into their own bodies and try to recognize what feels wacky or out of alignment, so that you can address it earlier rather than later. Mm-hmm. And then I think the next piece of advice is probably sort of annoying to people, but I really do believe that it's true, and that's your diet. And when I say that, I don't just mean eat a bunch of carrot sticks, drink a lot of water, and, blah, blah, blah. All of that is fantastic. But I mean incorporating into your diet things that help you to heal from trauma, or eliminating things from your diet that are only making things worse. So if you've identified that you're not sleeping well, you're suffering with anxiety, you might want to consider eliminating things like caffeine or really high sugar sodas or things like that, just for a few weeks to see how that impacts your ability to sleep or your anxiety. Or you might want to introduce into your diet things like mushrooms. I love recommending mushrooms to people. I'm drinking mushrooms right now because everyone can find some type of mushroom in their local grocery store most of the time. And a lot of the mushrooms that are edible are what are called adaptogens. So they're the fungi version of nervines, things like lavender and chamomile that relax us. These are like the food versions of that. They affect your nervous system. They calm you down. And so introducing mushrooms into your diet could be a way to calm anxiety, calm your stress, and help you sleep better. So that would be my first two things. Recognize that what's going on in your body might be affected by the traumatic experiences we've been going through. And then see if there are some simple adjustments to your diet that could, address the immediate issue, which doesn't seem very magical, but that's where the energy comes in. What I think I have come to learn as I have grown is how alive living things really are, how sentient, how conscious they really are. Yeah. And so if you eat mushrooms with intention and say, I need you to lend those wonderful calming properties to my body, nourish me, hold me, help me relax because I'm really stressed out, they will do that for you. Mm-hmm. And they will respond, and it will be just as powerful as lighting a candle for sleep or something of that nature, and just as magical if you can, see it that way.
Yeah. I think mushrooms is a really interesting one too, because as you were talking about it, there is definitely the herbalism side of it, but from a spiritual perspective as well, particularly if you're an animist and you believe that everything has a spirit, everything has a soul, then fungi are fascinating in terms of the energy that they have on the spiritual level as well, because they're so interconnected with everything. They send messages through the massive root system under all of the forest as they connect and the trees together. They're mind-blowing. I love talking about mushrooms. Everyone's looking like
on the solstice, which is a great time to work with the fairies and the nature spirits, and they have a great relationship with the fungi of the forest and are very involved in their growth and their personalities and their energies. And so if you were already trying to work with the fairies, bringing in this food that they spend so much time around is a great way, I would imagine. I don't work myself much with the fairies, but I would imagine that working with the elements that are in their environment, could really be something that bridges your magic and your mundane, your everyday life. I'm eating these mushrooms, but I'm also doing ritual and leaving offerings, perhaps of mushrooms, for the fairies that are in the area where, you know, these mushrooms come from, so they can really come together.
Yeah. And one last thing about mushrooms before we move on. We're going to be talking about mushrooms for a good 10 minutes. You're welcome.
I hated them as a kid, and now I'm obsessed.
Is they are their energy of decomposition, so they perform a very important role in nature, where they help to decompose everything around it and take their nutrients from that, and that sort of crosses over into that spiritual place of, it feels very heavy in the ecosystem right now. It feels like a lot of things are dying off, because they are, and there is heavy energies of death energy anyway because of the pandemic. So mushrooms kind of sort of cross that bridge as well, where it helps you to focus on energies of rebirth, and to take some of that heaviness into that, in that spiritual aspect, whilst you're imbibing them, and helps you to transform that within yourself. So it's kind of like a crossover between like a kitchen witchery, but also like you said, like that ritual, and taking the mundane and crossing it over into the spiritual. So that's awesome. I like that.
Yeah, I like that. They're kind of like the malachite of natural elements. You know, they take negative and they turn it into something that's really great, that both, you know, kind of takes you forward minded, but also reminds you of how you got there. You know, how was this mushroom nourished? So it's kind of impossible to ignore the death and the decomposition that was necessary for the mushroom to come along. So it's also a great way to reach out to ancestors, or to work with anyone who has passed on in that regard too.
Mm-hmm. So everybody has learned just how important mushrooms are today.
It's like we're gonna have to collab on a book about mushrooms. Mm-hmm. Mushrooms and magic.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten to hallucinogenic mushrooms.
That's just everyday mushrooms. Yeah, just your garden. And never mind the magical implications of soul travel with the the magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other ways that people might incorporate magic or herbalism, or a combination of both, that you think could be really beneficial at this time, when they might be struggling with what's happening in the world, and both in terms of COVID, like we mentioned, but as we're going to discuss as well, because of the turbulence and a lot of the social change that's happening, and the racial violence which is having an impact on people all over the world?
Yeah, I think that a simple daily tea ritual can be really helpful. This is something that is actually new to my life and my practice. I recently enrolled in the Gaia School of Healing and Earth Education, and a part of our course is a daily tea meditation. And it started as just a way for me to start identifying certain plants and their flavor profiles and how they affected me and things of that nature from an educational perspective. But it wasn't too long before I realized all the other benefits of something like that. And so what I would recommend to folks is to grab a tea. This doesn't have to be fancy. It can be intimidating when you see someone like, me walking around with like jars of herbs, but this can really be tea in a tea bag, in a box from the supermarket. Take a moment to look at the ingredients and perhaps find ones that are great for relaxation. And you can find lots of resources online, but things like lavender and chamomile and chickweed are, going to be calming to your body, and you'll find them pretty commonly used in commercial teas you can easily get. But you can take that everyday practice of having a cup of tea and turn it into a ritual that can help you with coping with what's going on right now. Because oftentimes I think the problem with traumatic events that affect us globally, but maybe not necessarily individually, is it's easy to not notice that you're not checking in with yourself and making sure that you're okay, and you're not processing like what has happened in a day, or what you have been exposed to in a day. So a little tea ritual, make yourself a cup of tea, light a candle and some incense if it feels right to you. Take a moment to say a prayer of thanks to the energy of the herbs for joining you and soothing you and calming you in this way. Ask them if there's anything you can do for them or that you could be doing more in the world, and then just sit and enjoy your tea. And I think if we do that every night, during really stressful times, it helps us to just realize, like, wow, I didn't breathe today. Like, I didn't take a deep breath today. Or like, did I really not sit down at any point today? Or did I not go, like, you know, you'll get to the end of a busy day and go, have I not gone to the bathroom in like 12 hours? How is that possible? But it's because we don't check in with ourselves very often until something goes wrong. So a simple tea meditation can be very magical, A. B, you have the medicinal effects of the herbs that you're taking in, which is in small doses because it's tea, but is still going to have an effect on your body, especially with prolonged use. And then you have the act of like checking in with yourself and reducing your own anxiety. Mm-hmm. So a tea meditation, this can be, you know, a 5-minute thing that doesn't take up a lot of your time. And if you're a witch, you probably drink tea already. I don't know what it is about us and tea, but we kind of go together. So you're probably already, you know, able to put on a cup at some point. So you can turn that into something magical that connects you with spirit, but also literally just roots you into the earth and helps you nourish yourself.
Mm-hmm. So it's very much from what you're describing, it's kind of almost looking at the cycles of your own body and listening to the rhythms of it and seeing what's happening. Because the way that I've been thinking about the body lately, and it has been something that's been on my mind for a few months, is how a lot of spiritual circles, they sort of take the body out of the equation, right? Spirituality is beyond the physical, not necessarily in sort of more pagan leaning paths, but even in some of those, sometimes the body is taken out of that. And for me, it's very much, well, if this is the physical body, if this is the physical vessel, and it just manifests into reality what is happening out there in the spiritual ecosystem, what was happening to us on a spiritual level and an emotional level. And so sometimes those little rituals are just helping us to sort of get back in tune with our own natural rhythm.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think you're right about that, that a lot of times when you think of a spiritual practice, unless we're talking about something like yoga or something like that, often the focus is on how we're doing spiritually, how we're doing emotionally, what we're tapping into there, and not so much just like, are you getting headaches? Are you sleeping well? Is your stomach upset? Are you suffering through constipation or irregularity? You know, we don't really necessarily think of those questions as spiritual questions. But that's definitely something that Reiki, I think, taught me, which is that once it gets to the physical body, oftentimes, not that it's too late, can obviously be addressed, but there were signs that brought you up to that point that you probably were dismissing because they're emotional or spiritual and they're not really like real. And so checking in with yourself regularly in a way is like giving yourself a physical checkup, because if there's something going on in your emotional or spiritual body that's funky, that doesn't feel right, that is out of balance, you can perhaps address it before it starts to show up in your life as insomnia or anxiety or depression.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other rituals, do you think, that would help people who are feeling very overwhelmed right now?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of things that you could do if you wanted to include ritual and magic into the process. I think that guided meditations and things of that nature are magical. And so if there are any witches, healers, spiritualists who offer guided meditations, I did one for peace as, you know, all of the social unrest was kind of unfolding a couple of weeks ago, because I just felt like that's what I needed, and I assumed other people did too. So that's on my Instagram and on my YouTube if you want to check it out. It's just called a guided meditation for peace. But something like that, where someone who you connect with spiritually can just sort of bring you into yourself and remind you of, you know, how strong you are of a spiritual being and how you can get through it. But I also think that protection and cord cutting rituals right now are both really useful. Cord cutting rituals are very helpful in cutting us off from the things that we're attached to that are no longer serving us. So if some of your stress, anxiety, or upset is coming from being attached to previous notions of health, or social interaction, we're in a post-COVID world. It will look different than a pre-COVID world. And perhaps that's really weighing on you, that you're not able to socialize the way that you normally would, or interact with the world in ways that you normally would. Or when it comes to racial justice, perhaps you have some prejudices that are really bothering you, that they're coming up and you're aware of them and you don't know how to necessarily get rid of them. And that's adding difficulty to this. There are a lot of things that we're going through that could be holding you down. And so a cord cutting ritual might be really freeing and releasing, so you can let go of some of those things and kind of move into a new state of being. But also protection rituals, because both physically with with COVID, and with protests and protesters coming to harm, and violence against Black and brown bodies and allies, sending healing and protective energy to yourself or to the people that you care about could also be a great way to feel like, okay, I took charge, I did something, and for me, I have not yet attended a protest. I don't know if I will. I don't know if that's the right place for me. But one of the first things I did was a protection ritual for everyone who is already out there. And that made me feel great, because I knew that I was contributing in a way that I could. That might look different from somebody else's, but it took a lot of guilt and weight off of me, that I'm not out there right now, but there are other ways in which I can support and I can help. And so protection ritual is a great way to help people, regardless of what they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really great, because I've spoken to a few people who they don't feel that their place is on the protest front line for whatever reason personal to them, and they have been feeling really guilty about that fact. And I've actually said to them, well, there's many different ways in trying to help and stand by people, and if you don't feel for whatever reason that that's where your energy naturally sort of gravitates, then it's more about looking at what you can do, like what is it that you feel drawn to, and what do you feel that you can do and can add to the conversation and to the action that's changing in the world.
Right.
Just as we're drawing to the half-hour mark, I would like to ask you what you think the role of healers is going to be going forward in the future, because I have this very strong feeling that we're very much in this sort of warrior energy right now, which is protesting, which is showing the world, leading the way, the torchbearers who are shining a massive light and bringing up all this change which needs to occur. And so that, silence will no longer be the currency of the powerful silencing everybody. But I have this very strong feeling that going forward, there's going to be a time when healers in particular are really needed. And when that will sort of flow into the different energy, I can't say, but there's my feeling that healers are going to be so important, particularly holistic healers moving forward. So what were your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the role of healers is only going to increase. I think it's very interesting that both of these struggles that we're dealing with right now, I feel like spiritual healers have been talking about for a really long time. And so when I think about COVID and I think about your immune system and healing, I think about all of the green witches that I have been following for so long, that have been championing immune system boosting herbs, championing the use of herbs in your magical practice, championing the importance of plant life just in your space, just for your own mental health and happiness. And then I think about all of the spiritual paths that are diverse and inclusive, and that have kind of come to the awakening that maybe the rest of the world is coming to much earlier. So in the spiritual path, spiritual world, and in the healing world, we have all these different modalities that healers fall into, right? These different sort of carved out little areas and cultures that we come from. But what I've noticed about pretty much all of them, and there are some exceptions for like initiation purposes, but pretty much all of them are open to everybody and are very anti the idea of being exclusive to anyone for any one reason or another. So, you know, some groups are initiation based or very lineage based, and it might be difficult to be considered, you know, initiated priestesses or priests in those lineages, etc. But generally speaking, even those lineages are very excited about anybody who wants to learn more and who's respectful of their cultural practices and wants to incorporate it maybe into their own practices. So while the rest of the world has been, you know, rather segregated and kind of discriminatory, I have not felt that in the spiritual world. All of the healers that I work with come from all different backgrounds and walks of life, and it's always been very much a sisterhood, brotherhood, theyhood, a connection across lines, because I think spiritual people just understand more than other people that differences of race and things like that are so small when we talk about cosmic perspective and spirit and how big spiritual energy actually is and how we're all connected on that sort of same channel. So for us, it's almost like I feel like the rest of the world is catching up with the healers. Mm-hmm. And so now that they are there, people are sort of like, oh, there's this group of people that I can go to that can help me heal without going to a doctor or without pharmaceutical medications, or that can help me to explore maybe religions or spiritual paths from cultures that I don't know, but I want to know more about. I want to learn more about. I want to be an ally for these groups. What are they practicing? What do they believe? What do they need? I can go to all of these really wonderful healers for information. So I kind of feel like, as opposed to like us catching up with what's going on in the world, it's like the world is starting to realize that we're here. And so inevitably the role that we play in everyone's lives is going to increase. Because I think once you become aware of holistic healing or spiritual healing, it's kind of hard to go back, you know. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like once you understand that and you start to care for all of your bodies in that way, it just becomes a way of life. So as more people realize that there are folks like us who are here for them, I think we'll just see healers become more and more important, especially in their communities, especially in the Black community here in the US. With all that is going on, there is a lot of recognition of especially like the older Black women who have all of this amazing wisdom and knowledge, much of which is not written down anywhere, that's just passed down through oral tradition, these remedies and recipes and all of this amazing work. People are starting to really realize, like, okay, sometimes like the medical field, like it's gonna fail us. Mm-hmm. You know, where do we go when that happens? So healers, especially Black women healers, are taking on a really important role in the spiritual community, but specifically in the Black community. And I just expect that to continue.
Oh, that's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to add here at the end, just before we wrap up?
I think so. I think I'll just remind people that caring for yourself is it's a full-time job, and don't judge yourself or criticize yourself when you fall off, because everybody needs a break from any job. Everybody needs to tune out for a moment, and so sometimes we do that with ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's nothing to feel guilty about. But once you realize that you're doing it, recognize that you have the power to change that in yourself, and that by addressing and paying attention to what's going on in all of your energetic bodies, that you actually can take control of a lot of things in your life that you might not have thought you could control. Your acne, your irritability, you know, your heart palpitations. These are all things that you might have dismissed as like just parts of your life, but that actually can be improved by looking at the energy of what's going on and addressing that. So my hope for everyone watching is that you'll take a moment today to tune into your own energy and just ask yourself what you really need so you can give it.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for coming and talking with me today.
Thank
And
you.
thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all very soon. Bye.
All right. Blessed be.